Government asserts it has the right, actually the duty, to repossess these assets and then reallocate them as it sees fit. Prior occupancy by an official doesn't create a special right. Yarborough really underscores the government's power here. He states unequivocally, there is no adverse possession against the government in Somali law. He goes on, occupation does not grant any rights. The government can reclaim the land, use it for any public purpose, lease it, sell it, or allocate it lawfully. And then he adds this crucial bit. This is not only a legal right, it is a public duty.
Wow. A public duty. That's a really strong framing of state power, isn't it?
It is. It frames it as an obligation to the public good.
But thinking about the individuals, the families who've occupied these lands, maybe for generations, it must feel less like abstract public duty and more like a significant personal upheaval. Does the scholarship or the legal framework touch upon the social challenges or potential conflicts, beyond just the legal right itself?
That's a very important point. And yes, while the legal right is presented as absolute, the implementation is certainly complex. The legal framework itself primarily focuses on the state's legal standing. The core message is clear. If the government issues a formal notice to vacate, occupants are legally obliged to comply. Failure to do so, that constitutes unlawful occupation. Simple as that, legally. However, practical implementation, that often involves a more multifaceted approach, trying to balance those legal imperatives with the social realities on the ground. But crucially, the underlying legal right of the state to reclaim remains absolute in this view.
Okay, I understand. The legal right is firm, even if the practice requires careful handling. So once the government does successfully reclaim this land, what's next? Is it just about taking it back, or is there a bigger picture, a grander vision for Somalia's future here?
Oh, absolutely. It's definitely not just about repossession. It's very much about repurposing. Once public land is reclaimed, the government actually has incredibly broad discretion in deciding its future use. And this is where that long-term vision really comes into play. They can integrate the land into, say, ambitious national development plans, constructing vital public facilities, think health centers, schools, roads, maybe security installations. They could allocate land to public-private partnerships to spur economic development, or allocate it for residential or commercial investment, but importantly, through lawful mechanisms, things like competitive public tenders.
Right, open bids to keep it fair.
Exactly. They could also choose to sell or lease the land, maybe to domestic or international investors, or even use some areas to resettle internally displaced persons or returning refugees, but in, organized settlements. And also very important, they can preserve land for environmental protection or for its historical or cultural significance.
Wow, okay, that's an incredibly comprehensive list. It covers everything from hospitals and schools to attracting international investment and protecting heritage. So this isn't just about reclaiming physical space. It really sounds like laying the groundwork for potentially a completely revitalized Somalia. It almost makes you wonder, though, how quickly can plans that broad actually start to happen on the ground?
Well, that's always the challenge, isn't it? Implementation takes time and resources. But having this clear legal authority is the fundamental enabling factor. Without it, none of those redevelopment plans could even begin. On the practical side, the process usually starts with the government issuing those formal notices to vacate. Occupants then have a legal requirement to comply or potentially face legal enforcement. But it's important to add, while the state's title is considered enforceable, due process is still required. That means things like clear notice periods and providing opportunities for legal appeal within the system. It's about upholding the law, yes, but also respecting individual rights within that specific legal framework.
Right. Due process is key even when the underlying right seems absolute. So, to sort of summarize what we've unpacked in this deep dive, public land in Somalia is just fundamentally legally different from private land. That's the core. It remains state property, regardless of how long someone has privately occupied it. And the government's right to reclaim it is described as absolute, deeply rooted in the country's constitution and its civil law. That's a truly profound distinction.
It really is. And upholding this legal principle, it has these massive implications for Somalia's rule of law, for effective urban planning, which is desperately needed, and ultimately for the whole path towards national reconstruction. As we said, this isn't merely about legal definitions of property. It's really about rebuilding a state. It's about establishing order, creating the conditions for hopefully future progress and stability.
Okay, so here's something for you, our listener, to mull over after this deep dive. Consider how this concept of public trust in land, as Abdullahi Yabaro articulates it so powerfully, how that idea fundamentally shapes a nation's its ability to develop, provide for its citizens, enforce its sovereignty, especially after periods of really profound instability like Somalia experienced. What does this specific case, this deep dive, suggest about the challenges, but also maybe the possibilities for other nations, particularly those grappling with similar issues of informal occupation and figuring out the reach of state authority? It really highlights that sometimes it's those seemingly foundational legal principles, the ones we might overlook, that quietly lay the groundwork for a country's entire future trajectory.